Alright, so today we're going to be running through what a full pre-flight looks on the Cabri helicopter.
Yep.
Cam is here with us. He's going to be reading off what the items are, and we'll just talk about what we look at.
Alright, so we'll start with section 1, main rotor blades. So it says clean, particularly at leading edge.
Yeah, so we want to make sure that we don't have too much bugs, dirt and stuff on the blade, because you can actually decrease your performance and lift. So just making sure they're fairly clean. These ones are getting a little bit dirty, not too far from needing a wash.
Yeah, so leading edge, hand check for damage and debonding.
So really important on these blades, the leading edge is bonded on, so we want to run our hand along, visually checking as well. Just making sure there's no debonding going on between the leading edge and the blade itself.
The tips, bolts, check for the lock wiring.
So at the tip here we have tip covers that hold on the weights for balancing, just making sure that's lock wired properly. And I'll only be talking about one blade, but you would obviously check all three blades as well.
Move over to the right door hinges.
Alright, so we'll move around this way. So here's our door hinges here. We're checking just to make sure that they are securely fastened to the aircraft. There's no cracks in any of the metal there.
Door hinge safety pins, early models only.
Yeah, these ones don't require them, but in some of the earlier models of Cabris, they had safety pins through those holes that keep the door on in case they open all the way.
Okay.
Windshield condition and cleanliness.
So just a general look over. There's a few bugs on here, so we could clean it right now. Looking over it, we want to make sure that we can see properly out of there. If there's a lot of streaks or something, it might affect our visibility out of the aircraft.
Right.
The Sideslip string indicator.
So that's this guy. We want to make sure it's there, it's secure. This one's getting a little bit on the frayed side. We may want to replace that soon, but it's still, you can still see where it is.
The lower windows condition and cleanliness.
So as we move down, we'll see the lower windows down here. That's what we can see out of when we look outside. Make sure they're clean, secure. And while we're down here, the next items you'll see will be Pitot Tube. We want to check that there's nothing blocking the Pitot Tube. It's clean there, it's secure. Also our static port right here. We have this little plastic tab here to make sure the airflow is not disturbed and creating a vacuum over the static port. Make sure that's in place and that your antennas are still in place there. There's two antennas down here that are secured on there, as well as you're looking at the landing gear from down below here. You want to make sure that it looks like it's got a proper bow to it. It doesn't look like it's bent up from a hard landing.
Mm-hmm.
So you can see both the front landing gear has a nice contour to it, and even at the back you can see the back one a bit as well from there.
And the landing light.
So landing light right here, basically looking for security, that it's not going to be falling out.
Now we move over to the left door hinges.
Same thing here, looking at the door hinges, security for cracks.
Same thing, the safety pins in the older models. Now we go to the fuel cap, closed and secured and key locked if equipped.
Alright, this one doesn't have a lock, but we make sure it's closed and secured after fueling.
Now we check the navigation lights.
So left side and right side we have navigation lights and strobe lights here. Make sure that those are both in place, as well as there's a strobe light on the top and the back.
The front and main gearbox condition, we've already checked the front.
Check the front, but now we can move around to the back here. You can have a better view of the back one, making sure that is in good condition. There's no damage to the fuselage where it can touch there.
And then while you're down there, the landing gear pants and skid condition.
Alright, so we're looking at the landing gear itself. There's no pants on these ones, but we look at the skids themselves. Have a look, there should be 5 skid shoes on there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Especially after doing a session of auto rotations where you're doing full downs onto the runway, always check those 5 on either side.
Okay.
I would also check bear paws if they're installed, but we don't have them now.
Right, there's bear paws that can be installed in the back, and if they were installed, we check those condition as well.
Now the fuel manifold, no leak.
Alright, so at this point, we're gonna open up our cowling. We're also gonna grab our fuel sample jar and take a look. If you look down here, you'll see this is the bottom of the fuel tank, and right here in the front there's a fuel manifold we can check for water. So we're going to fill about half a jar there. We want to look, roll it around, and if there's water in there, you'd see it at the bottom of the fuel. There's a bubble there.
Cool, now on to... check the other side, yep.
We'll do that after.
Okay. The cowling hinge, check.
Alright, so here's our cowling hinge right here. We just checked that there's no cracks in any of the points across that.
Now the battery strap.
Right here. So here's our battery, 12-volt battery. There's a strap that holds it in place.
And the terminals.
And the terminals themselves, you can give them a gentle wiggle, just make sure that they're in good condition.
And the breakers.
Breakers right here, they're all in. We don't see any white ring on there.
The map lines.
So manifold pressure is right here. So it's a place where you could find some wear, especially where it contacts here. So just run your fingers down there, make sure it's in good condition. It's not rubbing.
Transmission belt, check.
So we're gonna grab our flashlight here. Let's keep one in the aircraft. And we can get a look up inside here. Our belt runs from the upper pulley down there to the lower pulley. And we want to get a feel of it. We can see through to the other side where the ribs are and see if there's any damage in there. We can also see the outside of the belt here. And if we run it with our hand, we can actually run it all the way through and check for damage on the outside and also on the inside.
And then it says belt slack.
Yeah, so we want to make sure that there is some slack in the belt, just to show us that the last person actually disengaged the clutch, because it'll start very violently if the belt is too engaged.
Right.
So just make sure there's some slack in there.
Moving to the electronic ignition coils attachment.
All right, so here we have the 2 coils for the electronic ignition, two for the one side, 2 for the other side, and just making sure that they're secured correctly, they're not loose, and that the leads themselves are in good condition, they're not chafing anywhere.
And ignition wires.
Yeah, that's those ones there, the leads. Checking that for chafing.
Engine and baffling general condition.
Yeah, so we want to have a look over our entire baffling here. This is what keeps the air moving through the engine for cooling. So it's important that that's in good condition. There's no big cracks coming out of any of the screw holes. All the screws are in place, and that is all secure.
And then the engine skirts condition and attachment.
Yeah, that's the engine skirts there, so same thing there. We're looking for good condition, no cracking.
Okay.
Okay, exhaust pipes.
Coming down, so our exhaust system, there's 2 exhausts from either side. So 1, 2, 1, 2, and they all join together in the manifold here. And so we want to make sure that there again, we have no cracks coming from any of the welds. And we're going to look over all those welds and just general condition. Where the pipes go into the collector, make sure that's secure and there's not a lot of play and movement there. And just a quick look up at the engine itself where the exhaust attaches to make sure that there's no leakage of exhaust from up there and that they're securely attached to the aircraft engine.
And then heat muff and hose condition, no cracks.
Alright, so here's our heat muff. This is what takes the heat from the exhaust and directs it into the cabin. So very important that on that we make sure that this hose here doesn't have any cracks. If we had cracks in there, potentially exhaust and other gases and stuff from around here could enter the cabin. So make sure that's in good condition.
And while you're in there, mixture control and throttle control.
Yeah, so right here we can see our throttle control is attached here. So we want to check that that's secure. And same right up in here, our mixture control should have some movement, but back and forth, but not be free to move.
Okay, the airbox attachment.
Here's our airbox. So there we go. There again, we're just making a check to make sure that it's secure.
And the auto carburetor heat, check that it's cold.
Yeah, so right up in the front here, I don't know if you can see this red line here.
Yep.
So if this arm was lined up with the red line right now, and we were in the cold position, that would mean that it's not working correctly.
Right.
Right now we're in a cold position, so it should not be lined up with the red line.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, and now the engine connector locked.
Up here we have our engine connector. That's where all the wiring from the engine gets connected to the airframe. And we just want to make sure that's secure and locked.
Okay, engine mount condition, inspect for cracks or corrosion.
So all of our engine mount is one on this side, one on the other side, and we're just checking that they are not, the rubber is not falling apart, it's not cracked, and also the point where it attaches to the airframe struts, there's no damage or cracks in the metal itself.
Okay, and then the engine rubber mounts.
Those are the actual mounts down here. So we looked at the straps, and now we're looking at the rubber mounts at the bottom. No cracking there.
The Magnito connection.
So our Magnito is here. We want to just give it a wiggle, make sure it's secure, that it hasn't come loose, and just check over the wiring. We don't want to wiggle on the wires, we just want to have a look to make sure they look all secure and they're not chafing anywhere.
The fuel pump and hose, no leak.
Alright, our engine driven fuel pump is right here. We have the hose coming out of the fuel pump going into the carburetor, and we have the hose up here coming from the aircraft into the fuel pump. So just make sure they're both secure and not loose.
Alright, the oil cooler air hose.
Alright, coming up here we have on this side our oil cooler.
Yep.
That's what cools the oil from the air that's coming from the engine. And we have a cooling hose that comes out from that and blows air out overboard. The air comes from the inside through it and then out overboard here. So making sure that's not chafing and that it's not cracked.
Next is the flexible push-pull control.
Alright, so right here, right from inside, we can follow through this push-pull control. It comes up here and parallels along here. And it goes into the tail boom from there. And that's what, when we move the pedals, that's what affects the pitch on the tail rotor.
Right,
Just
okay.
checking that it's not chafing anywhere, causing damage.
Then onto the left tail boom attachments, no cracks.
So if you look in here, we're going to be able to see all 4 tail boom attachments. It's easier to just see the ones across, right in there. So we should be seeing no cracks in the welds, and we can look at all 4 of those.
And then it mentions cotter pins are installed.
That's right, each one of those bolts should have a cotter pin installed.
Alright, then the cowling can be closed.
Alright, we're down the left side. I'm going to latch this lower one, but I'm going to leave the other one unlatched so that we can open the other side down the road.
On to section 3, the left tail boom side, general condition, no damage.
Right, so it's a carbon fiber composite tail boom. So very important that there's no holes, no cracks, no damage of any sort on the actual structure, because it is a monocoque structure, meaning the strength is in the actual skin of the tail boom. And so very important that we don't have any exterior damage.
The horizontal stabilizer, shake and inspect.
Yeah, so it's mounted with 2 bolts. We just want to make sure that it's secure. We don't want to really test it out, we just want to see that it's secure and it's not moving.
The strobe light check.
So strobe light up there, it's a visual check. We're just making sure that it's centered and it's positioned in place there. And if it is, then it's secure.
Okay.
The rotor duct is clean.
Yeah, so here again, a little bit dirty right now. We'll probably want to give it a wash because this is actually like an airfoil.
Right.
If you think about it, the air is coming through it and forming the contour around it. So we want to have that clean like we would our blades.
Right, if possible. Yeah.
Tail rotor blades condition, clean, no impact.
Yeah, so very important that we look here, leading edges especially, because that's where erosion's going to happen.
Right.
So just check each one of them, make sure that their leading edges have no erosion. And as we grab them, we want to give them a wiggle. They should have movement.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the next thing. It says tail rotor blades slack, check all 7.
That's right. So we want to make sure that there is some movement in them. That's the way that they're designed with the bearings, that they have to have some movement.
Okay.
All right.
Next, tail skid and attachment.
So right here we have our tail skid. This is what would prevent, in the case of the tail getting too low in an auto rotation or something, this will prevent damage to the actual structure. So we want to make sure that's in good condition. It's properly attached.
And then the tripod attachments, check.
Alright, so the gearbox itself is attached at 3 points. 1, 2, 3. That's considered the tripod. And so we're just checking the attachments at each of the 3 locations. Make sure the bolts are secure, they're lock wired, there's no cracks in the structure that holds them on. And then of course that they're also securely attached to the gearbox. The 2 bolts here make sure the lock wire is in place.
Next is the tail gearbox oil level check, and the minimum is mid-side gauge.
So you can see there we're just above half
Yep.
on the sight gauge. That's where we like to see it. It could get as low as the middle of the sight gauge, but we don't want to see it lower than the middle. Important to make sure your aircraft is level when you check that, because if you can imagine if the tail is very high, it's going to look
gonna
low,
be up.
or if the tail is low, it's going to look higher.
Right.
So on the concrete here, it's nice and level.
Alright, the chip detector is locked.
Just confirming that is locked in place. That's our chip detector there.
Pitch lever and rod end, check there's free play.
So here's our pitch lever that we looked, the flexible rod that we looked up front.
Yep.
It terminates right here. And same thing here, we want to make sure that it has rotational movement. But if we grab it, we don't want to see play up and down.
Okay.
We want to make sure that is in good condition on the ball.
Alright, the other side of the horizontal stabilizer.
All right, so we're moving forward now. Horizontal stabilizer, give it the wiggle check. Also just check, obviously, structurally it looks in good shape.
The rear transmission tube, check while turning main rotor, so I can turn the main rotor for you.
I can turn it right here, actually. So we spin the blade, make sure that we can see the tube is spinning there, connecting the tail rotor to the main rotor.
And the right tail boom side, general condition, no damage.
Same thing here, we're going to look down the tail boom. Also going to have a look, make sure these bolts that hold the hangers for the bearings are not coming loose. And also that the rubber that is around them is not getting really cracked.
Okay.
They start to crack pretty quickly, small amounts, but they shouldn't be separating and cracking.
Right.
So we're checking that as we check the tail boom.
Yep, that was the last thing in that section, the bearings,
Okay.
bolts and plugs. On section 5, the muffler exhaust, check and check.
So open up this cowling at this point. So our muffler exhaust is right here. They have a muffler system installed. The bearings in here, we want to make sure that they're not getting loose. So if the exhaust is not too hot, we can grab it and give it a shake, and it should be fairly solid with the engine not rattling around on its own.
The right cowling hinge.
So here again, we're checking the right side, same as the left side.
And the right tail boom attachments, no cracks.
So we looked at those from the other side, but we can see them again from this side.
And the cotter pins.
Same thing in there. Checking this side. Good.
Muffler, no crack or interference with engine frame.
All right, so we're gonna have a look. As we look up here, there should be no interference between the frame and the muffler. And just quickly looking around the base of it on this side as well. No cracks over here.
And then the oil filter is locked and no leak.
All right, so oil filter right here should have the lock wire on it, and there should be no leaks coming from that.
Alright, the engine oil dipstick, check between 4 to 6 quart and tight.
Good. So we'll pull this out. I have a rag with me so we don't drip. We're gonna see on here, we are right at this level here, which is between 4 and 6. So we would leave it at this oil level now. If we got below the 4 level mark, we want to add a liter of oil at that point.
Alright, engine mount condition, inspect for cracks or corrosion.
Alright, we're going to spin this back in just gently till it bottoms. And then we're checking here, same thing, engine mount, same as on the other side. The rubbers as well as the strap.
The fuel line condition.
Alright, so we have fuel lines coming from the aircraft into the filter down here, the screen. And then from here they run through up to the fuel pump like we discussed earlier. And there again, we're making sure as they come through the baffles that there is no damage to them.
Next is the clutch distributor and attachment, and check that it's tight and no leak.
Alright, so here's our clutch distributor. This is what, when we engage the clutch in the aircraft,
Yep.
the motor rotates and allows the oil to come from the engine through to our actuator up here, and then that's what engages the belts, pushes the engine down and engages the belts.
Alright, next is oil cooler pipes, no leak.
Alright, so we can see if we look across, there's our oil cooler that we looked at, and there's the oil cooler tubes down there. That's what brings the oil into the oil cooler and back out to the engine after it's been cooled. No leaks there.
The VHF antenna.
Alright, up here you can see our radio antenna is attached. So we're just gently making sure it's secure, making sure these nuts haven't backed off, and our wire is properly fastened. The antenna looks good, goes through the cowling.
The engine cooling intake screen, inspect and clean.
All right, so sometimes, certain times of the year, you'll get grass and stuff that builds up on here. We just have a quick look to make sure that's not blocked, so air can get in the way it needs to. And that is nice and clean.
And then winter airflow restrictor check if installed.
All right, so in the winter time we have a restrictor in here just to not allow quite as much cold air in. It's not installed right now.
Cool. Ignition wires check.
It's the same over here. We're checking our ignition wires coming in, making sure that they're not chafing on the baffles here.
Cool. The engine and baffling general condition.
All right, so same as on the other side, we're checking overall baffles, top, the skirt on the bottom, making sure that that is in good condition. Same thing, make sure the screws aren't loose, they're all installed.
Next is the rotor brake, check pads and clearance.
All right, so a little bit hard to see on the video there, but right up inside there, you can see that there's some pads that wrap around a disc, and that's our rotor brake. So when we apply rotor brake inside, the shoes get pulled together and clamp down on that disc. So we just want to make sure that those shoes have good condition, they have good thickness still to them, and that they're all secure in the right positions that they should be. And you can take a look at that in a minute.
Alright. Flex coupling and bolts are tight and no crack.
Alright, so right up here we have our tail rotor drive shaft comes out of the pulley here. You can see that rotating. And right here, this orange plate is our flex coupling. So it allows, if there's any movement between the shaft and the upper pulley, it allows that displacement to take place and without loading up the metal itself.
Next is the upper pulley.
So we have our upper pulley in there, making sure we have no oil leaks from that, making sure it looks in good condition. We can see inside behind the belt the grooves, just making sure there's no damage from any objects, foreign objects getting in there.
Alright, the clutch actuator is retracted.
So if we look right in here, you can see the clutch actuator has a rod that comes out of the bottom of it. And if it was not retracted, you would see a long shaft coming out of the bottom of that actuator. Right now it is fully up, fully retracted. That's where we want to see it.
Alright, the main gearbox oil level, check that the minimum is mid-sight gauge.
So if you come behind the belt here, there's a door that we lift up and we can rotate out of the way. And then in behind there, if you look in there, you can see the oil level should be at least at half.
And then check that the chip detector is locked.
Chip detector is in the bottom, same as in the back. You can see the blue chip detector there, and you're just confirming that it is in fact locked in place, which this one is.
And then it says to close the door.
So to close the door, we make sure we come up over the rivet and then back down. You can see right there, that rivet holds the door in place.
Alright, the engine skirts condition and attachment.
So we talked about earlier, the skirts, make sure they're also in good condition.
The exhaust pipes.
Exhaust pipes on this side, same as on the other side. Come up, check their attachment to the engine.
Then the carburetor heating hose and the air intake ducted hose.
Alright, so carburetor heating hose, air and duct hose. The air comes in from the front through here into the air intake down here, and that's where it gets filtered around the filter. And then right up here you can see this hose takes some of the warm air from the exhaust, and if you turn carb heat on, or if carb heat comes on, then you get some of that warm air mixing with the cold air, and that's what allows us to keep the carburetor from icing up.
Next is the Gascolator drain sample.
Alright, so we've taken a sample on the other side, the lowest point by the fuel tank. We also can take a sample right here by the Gascolator, or the filter. Same thing. Check for any water that may be in the bottom. Nice and clean.
And then while you're there, the fuel flow sender check.
So we're just checking for security of the wires. Right here, this is the fuel flow sensor, and that's what tells us what our fuel flow is and our usage of fuel when we're flying.
And the aft landing gear attachment check.
So while we're down here, we can see the mounting for the aft landing gear. 2 bolts hold this bracket in place. That holds the center of the gear, and then the aircraft is able to teeter or tilt on that position to allow for change if you're doing sloping landings. Just checking security of the bolts, security of the landing gear.
Alright, then the cowling can be closed and lock both latches.
Alright, so we left the back one open before. I'm going to go ahead and latch this one. And then back here we just make sure that these are overlapped correctly. And we go ahead and latch that one as well.
Moving to the front and main gearbox condition.
So we checked the front gear bow when we were at the front already, so that was good.
And the landing gear pants and skid condition.
So same as on the other side, we're going to check to make sure the skids look in good condition.
And the shoes.
That all 5 shoes are in place, which they are, that's good.
And now is when you check the right bear paw if it was installed.
That's right.
And the navigation lights.
Navigation lights, we can have a look to make sure they're secure. They're LED lights, so pretty unlikely that they'd burn out, but you'd also check those on when you fire up the aircraft, check they're flashing.
Next, open the luggage door, step for main rotor examination.
Okay, so we're going to jump up here now, up to our main rotor. You can use a step ladder if you like, or you can also step up on the baggage compartment in order to get up, or you can just use a step on the side of the aircraft if you're tall enough.
And so first is the blade bolts check.
Alright, I'm just going to demonstrate on one blade, but you'd obviously check all 3 the same way.
Right.
So blade bolts, there's 2 blade bolts here. They go right up through, and there's a locking tab on the top, which you can grab and just give a little ding to know it's in right tune.
The elastomeric thrust bearings check elastomer conditions.
Alright, so up in here, you can see the black elastomeric bearing. And if you have a flashlight, it might help to get a little bit extra light in there. You can get a good look if there's any cracking in the elastomers themselves. And if you step up a little higher, you can see from the top as well.
Next is the main rotor hub, check for nicks or corrosion.
Alright, so this is our main rotor hub right here. So we're checking all around. We don't want to see any damage, any corrosion, any nicks in that. This one looks good.
And then the lead leg dampers, checking the elastomer condition for no cracks and the rod ends that are free without looseness.
Good, so once again here we have elastomeric rod end attachments on these. Checking for any cracks in there. That looks good. And the rod ends themselves, we want to check for play in the rod end. There should be no perceivable play by moving the rod ends around. That looks good.
Anti-vibrating pendulums, if installed, visual and free motion check.
That's these guys. They should move nice and freely and just bounce back and forth.
It says all control ends are free without looseness.
Yeah, so coming back down a little bit here, we have all of our control rod ends here. We want to grab them, move them around, back and forth in 2 directions, and just make sure that they're feeling secure, top and bottom.
The droop stop ring, the visual check.
Here's our droop stop ring here. As we move the blades up and down, it slides on the droop stop ring. We want to make sure that's not cracked, that it has some lubricant on it.
Next is the rotating and non-rotating scissors are free with moderate looseness.
Okay, so you can see here as I rotate around, this is the rotating scissor link because it rotates with the main rotor. I want to make sure that the ends don't have a lot of movement like this. They will have some movement back and forth. That's to be expected though. And the lower, you can't see from there, but it's just down below in the lower swash plate.
Yeah,
Right down here.
The Swashplate Check, no free play.
Swashplate Check, no free play. So the swash plate itself, I want to make sure that it does not have any free play in it, up and down.
And main gearbox upper fitting, check.
Yeah, so this is where we want to be up a little bit higher. You can see down to the gearbox area. The upper fittings are those plates right down there, and making sure that they're securely attached down there.
And the air intake and main gearbox compartment, no foreign objects.
Come around to the front. You can see from the front in this direction. A little bit hard to see, but if you come around, you can see The screen there, that's where the air intake is. So make sure there's no objects in there. That's clear.
And then while you're up there, the blade's leading edge, no debonding.
Alright, good. So we've checked the outer part already when we were on the ground, but now we're going to check the leading edges here, all the way in, including where they attach together and attach to the lead leg damper, making sure they're secure, there's no debonding, there's no cracking.
Alright, next it says step down and slam luggage door.
So we'll come down, just close that.
And then we're moving inside the cockpit. So the stroking seats, the upper slide is aligned and the attachment check.
Alright, so a little bit hard to see from the outside there, but we should see that the upper part of this is aligned with the upper part of the slider on both sides. It's easier to see from the outside a little bit on that side and the inside on this side. You can see right here it's aligned with the upper part of the stroking. This is the part of the seat where if the seat actually, if we landed really hard, the seat would stroke down. It would save your back in the event of an accident. We want to make sure that's in good condition. It hasn't been stroked.
Alright, the harnesses.
We're double checking the harness is in good condition. Give them a pull check. Make sure there's no fraying on the harnesses.
The main controls condition.
So the actual cyclic itself should feel secure.
The pedals.
The collective should feel secure. And the pedals, make sure there's no cracking
Make
in any of
sure
them.
objects inside are all stowed.
Looks good, everything's secure in here.
And the removable controls, if installed, check them too.
They're installed.
The cap on cyclic route if luggage secured in left cabin.
So that's not, the seat is not removed and the cyclic is installed, so that doesn't apply in this case.
Instruments and switches, check, and all breakers are in.
Just have a general check over to make sure the instrument panel is in good condition. And then if you look to the back, you can see here all the circuit breakers are in. So thanks for joining us today for a thorough pre-flight on the Cabri G2. Hope you join us again for some more instructional videos.